Alright, so tomorrow you'll be taking the Module 19 test. And this is a study guide for that test. There are a few definitions and terms that you'll need to know for tomorrow's test. So first of all, the first question here on your study guide is identify the following forms of a quadratic equation. And there's only one form that they're going to ask you to identify, and that's a standard form of a quadratic equation. Alright, so you need to know that, and you need to know how to write it. So it should be in your notes. Remember when we discuss quadratic equations are always in the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And I said always in the form. They are not always in this form, but this would be the standard form of a quadratic equation. Okay, standard form of a quadratic equation would be ax squared plus bx plus c. Make sure you know that for tomorrow's test. Now, when graphed, the quadratic equation creates a U-shaped curve called a parabola. Okay? We call that U-shaped curve a parabola. And it could open up or down. And if you remember from this week's unit and this week's lessons, we could tell whether it's going to be opening up or down just by looking at A. If A is positive, then your parabola is going to be opening up like a smile. And if A is negative, your parabola is going to be opening down like a frown. Next, define vertex. So, and this is a term that we also use when we were talking about absolute value functions as well. But when we're talking about quadratic equations or parabolas, a vertex would merely just be the turning point. The turning point of a parabola. And if we look at these two parabolas up here, somewhere right around here would be your turning point, and we would call that a minimum, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, because it's going to be the lowest point on the parabola. And if we look at the parabola on the right, the vertex would be somewhere up here. We would call that a maximum because it would be the highest point. Next, define axis of symmetry. Well, remember when we're talking about parabolas, there's a vertical line, although it's not actually on the graph. There's a vertical line that divides it into two equal parts. It acts kind of like a mirror, okay? And that's the axis of symmetry. So let me pause it and write it. And there you have it. This is also in your notes, but it's the vertical line that divides the parabola into two equal parts. That is the axis of symmetry. Make sure you are able to define axis of symmetry and vertex for tomorrow's test. We already briefly spoke about number 5. So when the vertex is the lowest point, we call that a minimum. And we will get a vertex that's a minimum when our A is positive. When our A is positive and our parabola is opening up, then your vertex is going to be a minimum. Now, the opposite of that, when the vertex is the highest point, or when A is negative, we call that, well, that's the highest point of the parabola, so we would call that a maximum. That's when the vertex is the highest point. So make sure you recognize and know all of these different keywords and definitions. Using the axis of symmetry formula, find the axis of symmetry and vertex for each equation. So to find the axis of symmetry, you have to use this formula here that we discussed in class, x equals negative b over 2a. So if we look at number 7 and we label everything, let me zoom in here. Number 7, looks like our A is going to be negative 1. Our B is going to be positive 10. And our C, which we don't really need when we're finding the axis of symmetry, but let's write it in anyways, that would be negative 26. All right, now let's use the formula. It's x equals negative b, which is 10, divided by 2 times a, which is negative 1. All right. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So this is going to be negative 10 over negative 2, which is positive 5. So your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 5. And that gives us our x-coordinate of the vertex as well. It's going to be 5 comma something. How do we find the y-coordinate of the vertex? Well, we just plug in our x value, which is 5. So it'd be negative 5 squared plus 10 times 5 minus 26. And this will end up giving you negative 1. And you'll be allowed to put all this in your calculator. Just make sure you put parentheses around what needs to have parentheses and make sure you do all that correctly. So your vertex is going to be 5 comma negative 1. Next, we have y equals 3x squared minus 6x. So what number is in the A position? A is going to be 3. B is going to be negative 6, and C is going to be 0. So this is going to be x equals negative, and then B is negative 6. So negative 6 over 2 times 3. Well, negative and a negative will make a positive, so that would be a positive 6 over 6, which is just going to equal 1. So your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 1. That gives us the x-coordinate of the vertex as well. The x-coordinate of the vertex is going to be 1, comma. To find the y-coordinate of the vertex, we just plug in 1. This will be y equals 3 times 1 squared minus 6 times 1. Well, 3 times 1 squared is 1, times 3 is 3, and 3 minus 6 is negative 3. Okay, so your vertex is going to be 1 comma negative 3. And then the last one, number 9, y equals 2x squared minus 4. Be careful because this negative 4 here is not your b value. In fact, we could rewrite this as y equals 2x squared plus 0x minus 4. And remember, b is the number that's in front of x, which in this case is 0. So your a is going to be 2, your b is going to be 0, and your c is going to be negative 4. And you go ahead and use your axis of symmetry formula to find the axis of symmetry. It's going to be x equals negative 0, which is just 0, over 2 times 2. That 2 times 2 really doesn't matter because we have a 0 on the top, and 0 divided by anything is just going to be 0. So your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 0. And to find your vertex, we just plug in our axis of symmetry. So y is going to be equal to 2 times 0 squared minus 4. Well, 2 times 0 squared is 0, times 2 is 0, and then 0 minus 4 is negative 4. So your vertex is going to be 0 comma negative 4. Okay, so now we are going to do what we did on the previous 3 problems, but now we're actually going to graph it as well. So remember, when we're graphing quadratic equations, you're going to want to find the axis of symmetry first, then the vertex, and then you'll just plug in points in a table. So the first step is to find the axis of symmetry, like we did in the last 3 problems. So I would first label your A, B's, and C's. So A in this problem is going to be 1, B is going to be negative 4, and C is going to be negative 3. All right. Now, just plug it into your axis of symmetry formula. So it's going to be x equals negative b, so it's negative 4 over 2 times 1. Well, negative 4 is positive 4, and 2 times 1 is 2. So your axis of symmetry is going to be positive 2, and we could fill that out on this end. X equals 2. Now, to find the vertex, we just plug in 2 in the equation. So that's going to be y equals 2 squared minus 4 times 2 minus 3. and that'll give you the vertex, which is the y-coordinate would be -7. So that means your vertex is going to be 2, -7. And remember, we put that vertex in the middle, 2, -7. And you just number up and down. So 1, 0, 4, 5, and you go ahead and put all these in your calculator. So if you put 0 in your calculator, you end up getting -3. You put 1 in your calculator, you end up getting -6. I'm sorry, this shouldn't be 4, this should be 3. I skipped 3 by mistake. 3 and 4. So if you put 3 in your calculator, you get -6. If you put 4 in your calculator, you get -3. Okay, and you would go ahead and graph it. So your vertex is 2, -7, which is all the way down here. Then 3, -6 would be right here. 1, -6 would be right here. 0, -3 would be right here. And 4, -3 would be right here. Then make that U-shaped parabola. Like that. And make it a little neater than mine, but that's it. So your domain, most of the time with quadratics, it's going to be all real. And then your range looks like it's going to be y is greater than or equal to the y value of our vertex, which is going to be -7. All right, next one. I'm going to graph this, but first by finding the axis of symmetry. Again, A is going to be -2, B is going to be -8, and C is going to be -4. So x equals -8 divided by 2 times -2. By now you should have that formula memorized, hopefully. -8 is going to be +8, and 2 times -2 is going to be -4, which would give us a -2 as our axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is going to be x equals -2. So from here you would find your vertex. The way you would do that is you just plug in -2 anywhere you see an x. It's going to be y equals -2 times -2 squared minus 8 times -2 minus 4. And that should calculate to +4. So your y-coordinate of your vertex is going to be +4. So write that in your table here, -2, 4 is your vertex. Put that value in the middle, and then number up and down. So put -3 here, -4, then I'll put -1, and I'll put 0. Okay? Now from this point, you would just need to plug all of these values in. So if you plug in -4 for x, you end up getting -4. If you plug in -3 for x, you end up getting 2. If you plug in -1 for x, you end up getting 2. And if you plug in 0 for x, you end up getting -4. Okay? So let's graph it. Your vertex is first, which is -2, 4, and that's going to be right here. Now the a here was negative. I'm sorry, that's not going to be there. I'm sorry. -2, 4 is going to be over here. Sorry about that. Now your a here is negative, so this is going to be going down, right? We know that because a is negative. Let's keep plotting some points here. So we have -1, 2, which is right here. -3, 2, which is right here. And then we have 0, -4, which is down here. And then we have -4, -4, which is down here. And then make your U-shaped parabola. And that is it. So your domain, again, is going to be all reals. And your range, remember, your range is going to be y, and it's either going to be greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to whatever the y-coordinate of your vertex is. Well, the y-coordinate of our vertex is 4, and this parabola is pointing down, so therefore it's going to be less than or equal to 4. Next, number 12. So A for number 12 is going to be -1. B is going to be not 1, but 0. and then C is what's going to be 1. So first we would find our axis of symmetry, which is going to be x equals negative b, which would just be 0, divided by 2 times negative 1. Well, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, but that doesn't really matter, because 0 divided by negative 2 is 0. So your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 0. Next, you would need to find your vertex. So to find your vertex, you just plug in 0. So this is going to be negative 0 squared plus 1. Y equals negative 0 squared plus 1. Well, 0 squared is 0 times negative, that would still be 0. So y is just going to be 1. So your vertex is going to be 0, comma 1. Put that number in the middle, and then number up and down, and plug away. If we plug in negative 2, we'd end up with 3. And if we, negative 3. And if we plug in 2, we also end up with negative 3. If we plug in negative 1, we end up with 0. And if we plug in 1, we also end up with 0. So now let's go ahead and graph it. 0, 1 is going to be right here. Then this is going to be pointing downwards again because our a was negative. So 1, 0 is going to be over here. Negative 1, 0 is going to be here. 2, negative 3 will be right here. And then negative 2, negative 3 will be right here. And connect it with that u. And that is your parabola. Let's fill out our domain and range. Domain is going to be all reals. And then range is going to be y, and then either less than or equal to or greater than equal to the y value of your vertex. The y value of our vertex was 1, and it's going to be less than or equal to because it is going down. And then the last problem, again, let's identify our axis of symmetry by using the axis of symmetry formula. First, I'm going to go ahead and label A. A is 2, B is negative 16, and C is 30. And if we use that in our axis of symmetry formula, it's going to be x equals negative 16 divided by 2 times 2. Negative 16 is positive 16, and 2 times 2 is 4. 16 divided by 4 will be positive 4. So your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 4. Now to find your vertex, all you will need to do is plug in 4 anywhere you see an x. So this is going to be y equals 2 times 4 squared minus 16 times 4 plus 30. And that would give you an answer of negative 2. So your vertex is going to be 4, comma, negative 2. Okay, you put your vertex in the middle of your table, 4, negative 2, and then count up and down. So we have 3, 2, and then we have 5, 6. And plug away. Plug in 2, we'd get 6 as our y value. If we plug in 3, we'd get 0 as our y value. If we plug in 5, we'd get 0 as our y value. And if we plug in 6, we'd get 6 as our y value. Let's go ahead and graph that. 2, 6, 4, negative 2. Let's do 4, negative 2. Let's do our vertex first. That'll be down here. And we have 5, 0, which is going to be here. 3, 0, which is going to be right here. And we have 2, 6. 2, 6, which is going to be right here. And then we have 6, 6, which is going to be right here. Go ahead and make that U-shaped parabola. And let's do the domain and range. The domain is going to be all real numbers. And for range, it's going to be y, then it's either going to be greater than or equal to or less than or equal to the y value of the vertex, well, the y value of the vertex negative 2, and this parabola is pointing up, so it's going to be greater than or equal to negative 2. Okay, that's it. So on tomorrow's test, make sure you are familiar with those definitions and vocabulary terms that we discussed at the beginning. Make sure you have that axis of symmetry formula memorized, x equals negative b over 2a. Okay, and just make sure you practice and graph a few more of these at home before the test. All right, I will see you tomorrow. Have a great night.